Okay, now let's activate our company. So when we click on this company, so this company become the activated company and it will be shown here. So right now it's online Rana and it will be shown here. So it's a dummy text that we have given. So also a font tag. So there we have selected but not connect. So when we click on this and we will make a URL and it will pass the company ID and we will get this company ID in our company controller and we will make activate this company. So right now it's not happening and let's achieve this task. Okay, in anchor tag, let's first where it is, make it a display style display block and save it. Let's refresh our page. So it's now in a block. Okay, here we will set our company link that we will send our company name. Okay, we will use a blade syntax and give a root, and the root will be company dot active, uh, company dot active, and we will give a variable company and is equal to, and it will be equal to mm, root company name. Let's uh, just give the company ID, uh, company ID. So this variable that we have a company ID. So we are giving a root with the ID of the company. Okay, in our web root, if control P and web.php, so we have our root here. Let's create that root first, and it will be a control L to select, control shift D to duplicate the line, and the request will be a get request, and it will goes to active, and we will give a variable ID. You can use ID or company. Uh, so company ID. So it will be easy for you to understand. So company ID, and it will go to company, and method will be active, and control D to select the next one, active, and the root name will be company dot active. And in the controller, now we have a method active. Okay, and let's return a string company ID. Okay, if go to index, so it will grow to company active and with the ID. Okay, let's check. Refresh, and here see, you can see right here the company ID will be displayed. So right extreme left, you can see when I hover it on Lana, so the root is companies and active, and after that we have receiving a 1. And if I goes to a second one, so it will show a second company ID name. So if I click on it, so you see, so company ID, and we can access it in our controller. Mm, uh, in our controller, let's die dump and input get, not input get. Mm, let's pass this variable here, ID or the company ID. Company ID, and we will diagram that company ID. We will to check either we are accessing this ID or not. Okay, so diagram company ID. Okay, come back, refresh, and click on active. So see, we have an ID that we are accessing from our index, and we will fetch that ID and we will activate the current company ID of the current logged in user. So let's now create the URL in our index. So here we are just giving a company ID, so not required. So we will create a company variable, and this variable will be equal to uh, will be equal to will be equal to company and ID. So let's concatenate that string. Okay, save it. Let's see, if we have an error. The parse error unexpected. This expecting this one. Mm, if I remove this, and let's check syntax error. Let's see what happened. Okay, company ID. Close this one and okay, let use a base, and we encode this URL. Before encoding, let me show you the and we have an ID. Save it. Refresh. Save it. Refresh. So if I go to this, so you see when we click on our link, so it is displaying an ID of the company. So if I change to two, so you see it is returning the two, the company number two. So it's not good. We have to make sure that this ID will be encoded in, and we will use an encryption method base 64, and we will encode our URL. So we'll use a base 64 encode method, and also we'll use a URL encode. So we'll encode that ID, and we will wrap this ID into encryption, and then we will decode the this ID by using a method of decode, base 64 decode and the URL decode. So we have to make sure that no one can misuse this application. So we have to encrypt that ID. So see, when I press to 2, it will show and it will connect. So anyone that is in your application, and it is, if it is open, uh, and anyone can give an ID of 1 and accesses. So now we have to encrypt that ID. So how we can encrypt that ID? So, that we can use it in here. Okay, URL and URL encode, and we will give another function base 64 encode method, and in that method we will give our company ID, company ID, and so we have a three parentheses. One is this, which is for root, and the 1, 2, and we have required a three parentheses. So three parentheses here, and 1, 2, and 3. That's me, correct? Save it. Okay, the comma will be removed, and we have to active string, and now we will create another string, and another string we will create a company variable, and we will assign the whole encrypted string to that company. Let me clear check it if there is no error. Root company dot active comma another string company, which is equal to URL encode and base 64 underscore encode and the company ID. Okay, save it, and let's back to our application. Okay, so let's refresh. So you see, you can see it extreme left here. When I hover the company, now the company ID is encrypted. See, when I click on this, hover it, this online runner company name. So see, company active, and the company is equal to MQ percentage 3D percentage 3D. It means that it is, the ID is encrypted. And when I click on it, to see a company variable is equal to this one. This is now encrypted. And now we will decrypt this ID, and we will use an active method. Okay, let's come to our controller. And company ID, let's remove it. So use a URL. First we have to decode our URL. First we decode URL, and then we will decode base 4. When we encrypt the ID, we have to encrypt the base 64 in code. So we have to encrypt this one. After that we have to encode with the URL encode. When we decrypt, first we decrypt our URL, then we decrypt our company ID. Come to here. Okay. Okay, URL. You see URL decode, and we will give our company ID, and let's close this statement. And here we will use uh, uh, base 64 underscore decode, and we will give in function base 64 decode and close that parentheses. So now we can see CID will be a company ID. Okay, and let's die dump this CID, which is a company ID, and we will check it, the decrypted ID, we will access it. Okay, so see left in extreme left. So when I hover it, the ID is encrypted, and when I click it, so ID is not P, and it is not decrypted. Why it is not decrypted? So company ID, URL decode base 64 underscore decode. Okay, if it is not, then we can access our company ID is equal to input. We can use an input method to access our get input. So get and the variable that we have sending a company. So close it. So we have to include this input in our namespace. So F5, and it will use the input facade. So it is included input in our namespace. Okay, save it, and input get company ID, and we will decode URL decode after base 64 decode and the CID. So save it. Let's come to our browser, click it. So it is now giving an empty. So it will give the string but not the ID. So we will access it. So I will check it in the next video. So stay tuned.